I just started
Fall,
learning.
so been feeling that flannel weather.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, thanks for doing this. Before I jump into it, I kind of wanted to explain what I'm trying to do here with this podcast. In learning about biotech in the past half year, it's been very clear to me that this field is incredibly complex and it's also incredibly fascinating, but it's not very accessible for people who haven't taken biology since high school, people like me. And I kind of just want to ask basic questions about biotech and learn more about what founders like you are building and make things a bit more legible to the people outside the Cambridge and South SF bubbles that I know you're very familiar with. And I couldn't think of someone better than you to kind of break things down because one thing I really admire about you is your ability to kind of take these high level concepts and break it down for layman people like me. So I'll give a brief background on who you are. You're a founder, working on Acorn Genetics, a next gen sequencing startup. Went to Northwestern, dropped out, got the Teal Fellowship, started working on this. Lots of questions there, but I think the best place to start our conversation is with the circus life. Last time we spoke, you talked about your grandmother who's Romani, and she went to the circus. Could you tell us more about that? Like, I feel like that's super interesting.
Yeah. My grandma's actually not the Romani one. She's just pure Romanian,
Oh, sorry. Yes, my bad.
German, if anything, like German Romanian, very like blonde, blue-eyed. I actually didn't know that she ever like did anything with the circus. I found out after I had already joined. Probably my family was like kind of keeping it on the down low. It's not really considered it's not really an aspirational thing in Romanian culture to join the circus. It's usually if you're in the circus, if you're in the entertainer class, it's usually one of the lower classes. It's not considered like a very high thing, but she was always a very rebellious and a very creative spirit. So I believe she was about 18 when she maybe a little bit younger. Maybe she was like 16, 17 when she ran away to join the circus. And I was around 15 when I actually joined. So I was right around the same age as her, maybe a tad younger. And kind of I found out that the same sort of things appealed to me. So it's that same sort of like, risk taking, also the artistic element of it. Both her and I were always like very artistically inclined, which is a bit of a unusual thing in my family. So typically my family is very much more of the analyst type. So a lot of engineers. And then there's my grandma who was like more of the crazy, like she was the one who like she made tapestries and she like did like a lot of dancing and did like she was always involved in these endeavors. So a little bit genetically, some of that must have just like passed through to me because I had those same sort of inclinations and desires. And a little bit like I think the whole like my whole circus arc was kind of it was a very prophetic arc like to the entrepreneurial one that was to come because many of the same things you do when you're like in the circus, which is you take these kind of insane risks. You're up in front of a crowd, you're like pushing yourself to the limit, especially physically, but also very much mentally. Some of the tricks require like a very high degree of coordination and awareness. It made sense that like me, who naturally has a more like risk-taking build, would pursue both that and then also entrepreneurship afterwards.
So you spent a summer at the circus, is that right?
It was 2, 3 years actually.
Whoa.
So it was in tandem with my school. I was still in high school. I wasn't quite at the same extreme as my grandma, who truly like ran away and joined. I found it through a friend of mine who was involved, like came one day to one of the meetings
Yeah.
and then just started doing it. And I started doing it over the summers. We were in a number of parades. We did the Thanksgiving parade too. We did the Parade of Lights, which is like kind of Chicago's like Christmas parade.
Yeah.
I was in a number of Fourth of July ones. There was a number of competitions in Cincinnati. And those were all over the summer. So those would be ones that we would actually like travel for and go and attend. A few of I ended up stepping away from it around the time I hit like 18, 19 and I hit university level. I started up Acorn and it's hard to start cutting things out of my schedule. So unfortunately stopped around the age of 19, but from 15 to 19, I was pretty active.
I feel like there's something to be said about genetics and epigenetics in the fact that you're a grandma and you both independently discovered the circus.
Yeah.
But it's a good segue into how you got, I guess, infatuated with sequencing to begin with.
Yeah.
That's also a very personal story for you, right?
Yeah. No, see, the my kind of original mission with genetics was inspired by kind of my dad's actually struggle with a genetic condition. So There's condition that runs in my family. A lot of people have it. And there's not really a good way right now to get a good genetic test for it. So what I found was just by navigating the healthcare system, insurance would not cover it. It was going to be around $8,000 to $10,000 out of pocket. That's figures now adjusted for inflation. So if you ever find an earlier pitch of mine where I'm saying $7,000, like, yeah, $7,000 back then or whatever. But it caused a lot of out of pocket and not money that we necessarily had, like neither myself nor my parents. Like my parents were like, like Romanian immigrants, like came here with nothing, like built what we had. So we didn't quite reach the level of wealth where we could just throw 10K at a potentially preventative genetic test.
Yeah.
So I was like, this has to be simpler. I had worked part-time in a couple of other institutions. So I worked at the DNA Discovery Center at the Field Museum. I worked actually in the Feinberg School of Medicine in the epigenetics lab down in Chicago. So that's the Northwestern like grad school. And I had some exposure already to sequencing. So I'm like, why is it so expensive? That was the question that I kept coming back to. Why would it cost so much? And that's kind of where I stumbled upon like the main problem with sequencing was that it was just so fundamentally built for research. Like they built these tools for massive research universities who were able to afford them because historically the kind of testing you wanted to do was research-based. You wanted to take thousands of samples and you wanted to look at a couple mutation sites and you wanted to study what those mutation sites meant. And that's kind of the classic next-gen sequencing.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so when you're trying to test an individual, you basically run an assembly line of tests. So it's drives up the cost. It's very labor intensive. There's not a lot of good solutions. There was a couple other sequencers on the market. They were trying to go for longer read, more comprehensive sequencing, but they hadn't really taken off for various reasons. And that's kind of why I was like, okay, like this is the core problem. Like, why isn't like this kind of testing is growing in demand, and there's no instrument that can serve it right now. That's what kind of like oriented me towards it. Was like originally I was like, I'm gonna build a sequencer to test myself, my sister for my dad's condition, and then I realized there were so many people in the same position as me, and I kind of realized that because I started telling people I was building the sequencer, and they kept asking me like, can I use it when you're done? Can I also try something?
How did you build your own sequencer? That sounds ridiculously hard. How did you get started?
Let's just say ignorance is bliss. And if I had known how hard it was when I started, I don't know if I would have actually gone down the path I did. I think a big part of it was I was dumb enough to try it at that point.
Yeah.
So I was like 19. I was like, I can do anything. I mean, I got into Northwestern and I was like, I can do all this other stuff. So I started by first, like it started like a literal just sketch in my notebook when I was really bored during an engineering analysis 2 class. Didn't do very well in that class. My mind was occupied elsewhere. And I was just trying to like map out how it worked. And then I realized fairly quickly, I was like my first attempt was actually the same sort of biochemical approach that other sequencers have taken to date. Like I kind of knew that's how they were done. I started going that route, quickly realized that it wasn't going to work for what I needed. The amount it cost to do a biochemical like sequencing approach, like it was so high. So I started to just talk to like different people like at Northwestern, other undergrads, honestly. And I met Ryan, and Ryan was working in the Rogers lab at the time. He was a master's
Ryan's your
student.
CTO now, right?
Yes, my CTO. And he was doing work with nanopores and specifically solid state nanopores in the Rogers lab. So he kind of came with that approach. I kind of landed on nanopore as the best possible approach just from my initial reading. And I knew that like there was a lot of really great work that was done in solid state nanopores. And bringing on Ryan was kind of the thing that like clicked that as the method to pursue in the first place.
I was gonna ask before we kind of get into like the weeds of how you built it, maybe it's helpful to kind of set the stage around what did sequencing used to look like and what it looks like today and the various approaches that exist. You use, my understanding, there's Illumina sequencers that use next-gen sequencing. I don't know the details of how it works. I just know that they do short read, and it's a bit of a guessing game when you put these short reads together. And then you have nanopore sequencing, folks like ONT and PacBio as well. Well, sort of PacBio. What is the major difference in how sequencing is done in these different ways?
So there's sort of 3 waves to sequencing. First wave was Sanger sequencing. Sanger sequencing was like the very, very slow, low throughput short read. You're literally going like nucleotide by nucleotide through the DNA. or potentially up to like 100 to 300 nucleotides at a time.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is you are attaching markers to, so you know how like DNA comes like in a helix structure, like
Yeah.
it's coiled? For DNA, like sequencing by synthesis, decouple it, denature it, have it split, and then you have a new like DNA build across, like the complement strand build across, and that's the synthesis portion. And what you're actually reading is the synthesis portion because you've added extra markers there so that you can detect the complementary strand. So that's like sequencing by synthesis. Sequencing by synthesis. What Sanger sequencing did was exclusively pretty much sequencing by synthesis. And then in the next generation of sequencing, which is Illumina, they massively parallelized that. So it was still fundamentally sequencing by synthesis,
Yeah.
where you're still doing that very complex biochemical process of denaturing the DNA, attaching a complementary strand, reading the complementary strand with your biomarkers attached. That is very different from kind of what is the standard now in nanopore technology. So nanopore technology, ONT still adds a complementary strand, like they still do barcoding, but they're effectively reading the DNA like as it travels to the nanopore based off of its disturbance of the electrical membrane.
Yeah.
So that's very different than how you would do it originally with like sequencing by synthesis. I'd also note that like sequencing by synthesis is really helpful if you're looking for something in specific, like if you're targeting a specific region, because usually you're trying to find like, oh, I'm going to just test to see if this allele is present at this gene. You want to cut up the DNA so you may have that segment. If you want to run something that's more comprehensive and get a full actual sequence, you would have to do something like nanopore technology, or PacBio does have a fluorescent detection technology they've developed as well, where basically it's still like they're still attaching a complementary strand, and in each strand has a different fluorescent marker, and then it's running through their sensor. So it's still like it's not quite a nanopore because the pore size is much larger, like the thing that's it's being pulled through. This is my understanding of it, but the primary detection mechanism is the fluorescent detection.
Got it. Got it. So
So
how
that's
did
just
you?
the overview.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. When I first started learning about nanopore sequencing, it was super easy to visualize like a chip with a nanopore, like a tiny hole in it, and you take the DNA strands and push it through it, and depending on the base pair, you get a different electrical signal, and so you kind of figure out what the base pairs are. And what you're saying is that nanopore tech is better at identifying perhaps novel sequences that can be useful in identifying novel pathogens or whatever else, versus short read where you kind of know what you're looking for and you're just trying to identify
Yeah.
and match it to the existing database of sequences that we have. That makes sense. So you decided to work using nanopore tech specifically.
Because that was what was most suited for doing
Yeah.
a long read analysis and for individual level. I know there's some plays now for also like fourth generation sequencing when you
Oh.
parallelize the nanopores. ONT and PacBio are both doing that. I think PacBio is trying to get 50 samples at a time, and then ONT, I'm not sure exactly how many they have in their PromethION or their GridION, but they have these very large instruments that have multiple
Yeah.
nanopores you can run concurrently. So that's the other thing I've also seen in the sequencing space.
Yeah.
But to me, the use case that was the most appealing was a low cost, decentralized type of sequencer.
Yeah.
And kind of my main motivation for pursuing that was just noticing how technology had always sort of evolved. So originally, everything starts centralized and it's very, very expensive, and then moves to become decentralized. So famously, like communication, if you wanted to send a text message to someone, well, you're basically having to go to the telegram office, send a telegram to another telegram office, and then that telegram gets delivered to that person. So it goes from one centralized facility to another. And then we developed phones, and then that was a little bit less centralized. And then we developed like smartphones, which now you carry with you and you can send messages anywhere at any time. And so seeing that kind of movement, you saw the same thing with computers as well. They started like supercomputers started in these large research institutions, very similar to sequencers now, basically only used for these like very academic, very like specific purposes. Then they start
Defense.
to get better and better. And then now everyone's got a computer at home, or multiple, honestly, between the phones and the iPads and all the toys.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a perfect analogy because we kind of did go back to a centralized paradigm of computing with cloud computing. What does that mean in terms of sequencing? I'm not entirely sure.
You can access it from anywhere.
Yes, you
The
can
cloud
access
is
it. Yeah.
the cloud. I understand what you mean by its centralization, but from a purely like access perspective, you don't have to go somewhere to then access the cloud.
Yeah.
It is with you 24/7.
Yeah. That is true.
So,
It
and
reminds
that's
me of
kind of how I'm seeing sequencing moving.
absolutely. It's funny to me, like the biggest, one of the most successful sequencing companies in the past few years is Plasmidsaurus, and their core innovation was logistics and delivery, as opposed to actually decentralizing sequencing capabilities. So I don't know what you think about Plasmidsaurus, but kind of speaks to the inability right now of the sequencing world to actually put sequencers in the hands of everyone. But we're innovating on the delivery layer or on the logistics layer. So because Plasmidsaurus, for the record, they kind of perfected 1 day deliveries of RNA sequencing samples, and that was a big unlock, believe it or not. But what you're saying is, if we have sequencers in the hands of everyone, you don't even that's like a step function change over what we have today.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole movement towards like point of care and continual monitoring.
Yeah.
So a lot of people ask me, okay, well, why would I ever need a sequencer at home? Like I test myself once, I
Yep.
got my DNA and then I'm done. But the truth is, like, if you look, like, even in all medical devices in all medical fields, like things start with that centralized thing. Like, okay, you're having problems with your sleep. Cool. You come, you do a sleep study in the hospital, and then we see what's happening, and then we'll prescribe you something, and then you'll come back and do the sleep study. And then Aura Ring came out, and then Apple Watch developed a sleep tracker, and then all these things came. So now we're continually monitoring sleep. And that's kind of how I see things moving with genetics as well, where continual monitoring is going to happen both on the genetic level as you're like sequencing your microbiome, you're seeing how things are changing, you're assessing if you have various bacteria or cultures, or if you're currently sick with something, you can quickly assess that. That's something where I see like continual monitoring becoming an everyday thing at the home. And on the epigenetic level, like increasingly we're finding that chronic diseases manifest as a result of epigenetic modifications. Like, why do you get a disease when you're 60 and not when you're 20? You have the same DNA. And a lot of that is like, oh, your DNA has like methylated and things have changed. Like,
Yeah.
why do identical twins not spontaneously form cancer at the exact same time?
Yeah.
Because they have differences in their environmental factors that changes their DNA methylation. So we're finding that it's more and more important to track that epigenetic like layer and assess what's happening. What's great about nanopore sequencing, especially electronic-based nanopore sequencing, is that you don't destroy the epigenetic layer when you go ahead and do sequencing.
Yeah.
So you retain that information. Most forms of synthesis and having to like separate the DNA and reattach its complement, and you're only reading the complement, you don't actually get a really good read of the methylation layer. So it's also why I think solid-state nanopore sequencing is going to be the future of this entire field. Even if you move into fourth generation, you go into parallelization, you need the kind of chip that generates the most data.
Yeah. What are the technical challenges ahead of us right now? I guess the one thing that I realized was just the library and sample prep required with Illumina sequencers and PacBio sequencers was just really prohibitive. Like you need lab technicians to be able to isolate certain samples, prepare them, and then it takes a specialist to use these machines. But you're describing a world where I can swab my cheek and figure out what exactly the kind of illness I have. What are the challenges to actually being able to do that?
So the largest one right now is manufacturing for us. There's a lot of components to these devices. There's microfluidics, there's obviously nanofabrication, there's enzyme and reagent development, and there's not going to be one facility that does all three of these things at once. So not to mention the electronics and all the other parts that go into it. So right now, that's kind of the big challenge that like we at Acorn are facing. And we're starting small by finding use cases in which the Acorn Lab is being reused constantly. So we do have like our first few like pilots and sales in breweries and in agricultural groups, people who are constantly testing for bacteria or testing for certain strains of yeast, for example. But that's kind of what I see as the big challenge, is that usually there's a bit of a lag between technologies developed and then the manufacturing capabilities to scale are there. And we're working as much as we can with the various government organizations who are trying to improve, like increase the level of manufacturing in the US. So thankfully there is the right political climate for that. But that's definitely something I think has been a little bit holding back sort of this like wave of innovation. Like right now, I think NVIDIA really highlighted how valuable it is to produce chips, especially these very, very complex semiconductor-based chips in the US. And we're lucky at Acorn, we can kind of capitalize on that awareness and movement, and then push for more chip production in the US of these very, very advanced like nanofabricated chips. But that's still, I would say, the biggest problem.
Yeah, I that seems really hard. Out of curiosity, what does the use experience look like for this brewery right now when they use Acorn machines to sequence? I know they're using it for quality assurance and they're sequencing their batches of beer before they're shipped out, and you found like
Yeah.
spoiled beer before and saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars, which I think is super cool. What does it actually look like for them to be able to use these sequencers? Because I remember visiting Ginkgo a few weeks ago, and the lab setup was so complicated. I can't imagine they have a similar setup at these breweries, or do they?
No, it's much, much more minimal. So right now with the breweries, the workflow they're dealing with is usually a incubation step. So they do the standard. So usually the average brewer, like either they were outsourcing their testing entirely, or they were doing culturing on site, which was a 7-day to 14-day process.
Sorry, what does that mean?
It's basically, are you familiar with like a petri dish?
Yeah.
You put some drops there, you see what grows.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, they would go ahead and try to culture to see if there's anything really toxic present. So they would do that for like 7 days. Unfortunately, the difficulty is for a lot of beers, it's more than just presence and absence you're trying to look for. You're trying to look for how much of something you have, because you actually want a little bit of like lactobacillica sometimes, so you can get a certain flavor profile without it like actually causing like horrible stomach aches. So there are like limitations to that technique, but most breweries already had that set up. So we do start by like a culturing step that just helps with like isolating the like key bacteria that they're testing for. And most of our early testing with brewers have actually been like just like quantitative PCR. So like they've been just testing like, okay, how much of this do I have? Because they'll know that they'll have this sequence. They just don't know like how much of it is present or if it's present or not. There's some things they like don't want to have like at all. Like there's certain strains of wild yeast that are very, very detrimental that are to be avoided. And as we're going more and more into non-alcoholic beer testing, obviously alcohol is great because it can limit the development of Salmonella and E. coli. Once you make a non-alcoholic beer, you don't have that limiting agent anymore. So you do have to test for Salmonella, E. coli, and other of these very toxic things that will give you the worst stomach ache of your life. So right now, you like collect your sample. You do like probably a 24-hour incubation step, which normally you would do 7 days. Your beer is going to usually sit for a couple days anyway. You would take your sample post-culturing, you would insert it into the Acorn lab. Literally, we have like, it like comes out, there's like an insertion panel. You just drop it in, you push it in, you give it an hour.
Oh, wow.
Within an hour, it has a little screen on the device. It'll upload your results. It'll tell you like, hey, your beer is, good to go. Or, hey, your beer had this in very, very high quantity. We advise against or we advise either further retesting or against actual shipping of the beer.
That's really cool. When you describe it like that, it's much easier to visualize a world where everyone has a sequencer in their home. And if someone gets sick, like my brother is sick right now, and we don't know what he has. It should be as easy as like getting a swab and figuring out, here you have this exact strain and here's the exact kind of medication you need, et cetera, et cetera. And we just don't have that right now. So I feel like it's the first step in unlocking precision medicine, which is kind of a buzzword, but it seems obvious.
Yeah. Hey, preaching to the choir here. Totally agree.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna ask you what do you, it's a hard question, but what do you expect? How do you expect our day-to-day life to be different once you have ubiquitous sequencing?
I imagine we'll be spending less time in waiting rooms.
Yeah.
That's kind of the big one.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a number of implications. What's difficult, though, with building a platform technology is fundamentally like you build the platform and then people will build on top of it things you couldn't possibly imagine. Like I don't know that Steve Jobs would have predicted Snapchat when he first designed the iPhone.
Yeah.
Like there's certain things that like just get built on top, and that's kind of what we're doing. It's like what I suspect is there's going to be some sort of like home epigenetic tracking. I think there's going to, and that's going to be like, chronic disease prevention. There's going to be like a lot of medical tech that's built on top of it. I suspect it's going to be some sort of like Walgreens, pick up your like flu test for the flu here. Easy to like buy type of test. I imagine there's going to be some sort of like like I'm trying to it's hard to imagine the possibility because there's so many things that could manifest from this. And I don't think Acorn's going to build all these things. Like
Right.
we're going to build a platform that all these things get built on top of. Like would you have predicted 23andMe when Illumina came out with its like next gen sequencer? Like that's something that just someone came up with. I don't know. Maybe they're going to make some test to like test your dog's poo to see how his
Yeah.
health is doing or something. Like I don't know like what's going to be
Yeah.
the thing. But when you have a purely non-discriminate sequencer that everyone has, maybe people are just going to have like, botanical tests. They're just going to see like what's in their garden. Oh, or maybe they're going to test their food to see if it's been genetically modified. Or like, I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that the level of information that will be accessible to people is going to be at a new level.
That makes sense. It is super hard to imagine. One thing I'm learning more about and getting a bit excited about is just all of these people biohacking individually and trying out different peptides and different protocols. And if there was like a verifiable way to do these quote unquote clinical trials in a decentralized way and get verifiable data around all of it, I think sequencing would be a big part of that.
Methylation tracking is totally going to become part of the whole biohacker thing.
Yeah.
Like just like seeing your epigenetics being like, yeah, I've got the methylation markers of an 18-year-old. Like that's like the new thing to like brag about.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like what I think most of these companies that are doing like DTC, blood testing, etc., and they're offering you a biological age. I don't even know what their baseline reference is. Like how are they coming up with this number? And it seems kind of a bit of a gimmick to me right now at least. But in the future, I think you'll have much more data, you'll have a better sense of an actual biological age, whatever that means. And the key to that is just unlocking a lot more information. How do you think about privacy and data sovereignty in this world where you just have this flood of genomics data swirling around, I don't know, on your cloud server somewhere?
Yeah. What I see it a little bit like the laptop model.
Mm,
Like at the end of the day, we build devices and we do provide like the let's just say like the some of the recurring requirements of operating the device. I do think that a lot of the data question is going to end up like more belonging to like the applications that are built on top of the device. Like Apple does not, I don't think Apple has access to your Gmail. I don't think Apple can read your Gmail. It's my understanding.
they have access to a whole lot of other data, and
They
they
do,
have
they do. But the way I
very,
see it is
yeah,
like we're not going to have a way to just take your like right now, if you were to go ahead and like open your computer and you weren't connected to anything, you were connected to the internet, and you just started typing in your notes app. Apple does not get access to that. And the way I see it is like, unless I don't know, you like hop back on the internet, give them access somehow. I see Acorn operating a very similar model where like you can go ahead, run a sequence on the Acorn lab. We're not going to automatically have that data transmitted to us. All the information does stay local to the device unless it's connected to like an Acorn application where you're opting in to share your data.
yeah.
Like with our first few customers, we do have data sharing agreements in place. We do give them a big discount on the devices and some of the equipment as a result. But unless you're opting into a data sharing agreement, information's not going to leave the Acorn Lab device. It's in your possession.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the challenge for you is to build up the kind of brand equity where people trust the Acorn devices. There's like the 23andMe fiasco was, I think, a bit of a setback for the genomics
Yeah.
space where the company went under and the data became public slash bought out by somebody. I can't remember now.
The original founder bought back her company. Kind of
Okay.
kind of best case scenario, but there was a lot of concern for a bit because the company went bankrupt and they were looking for a seller. And if the original founder couldn't buy back the company, I don't know, someone would have ended up with a lot of people's genetic information that was like property of the company.
Yeah.
That was also like, a bit of a scammy thing in the terms and conditions of getting a 23andMe test. Obviously, like there is just a difference between being a service provider and being a like
Platform.
device provider. And I
Yeah.
think that because we're fundamentally in the hardware space, privacy is less something we're not asked about as much, something people aren't as concerned about.
Yeah.
Because like again, like people are concerned about like Instagram has all my photos, Facebook has all my information, but no one's like, oh no, like Apple has my like Facebook account and all my Facebook info. No, that's the stuff that Facebook owns.
Well,
So
Apple has access to your iPhone. Well, all the apps that they built natively on
The apps they built natively, but the apps are added on top. So yeah, it's an imperfect example,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to find a good way to find. I'm trying to find a good analogy for kind of how we exist in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the right analogy here too. I can't think of the perfect one. All analogies are imperfect by definition, but yeah, there's definitely something there. So in learning about sequencing, I realized how important and critical sequencing is to just the way we understand biology. It's like having eyes into these submolecular pieces of our biology that are so critical to understand. What's something about sequencing that you don't think most people grasp, that you wish people understood?
Yeah, the multi-purpose use cases of it. I think a lot of people only have like the 23andMe use case where you're
Yeah.
like, so you sequence your DNA once and then you got everything you need. Which, like, yes, the genetic layer, like you can only pull so much out of your own genetic layer. And that was like something I struggle with, or especially like early with like pitching and talking to people, is they'll be like, okay, great. So you've sequenced everyone in the world. Now what? I'm like, what about all the bacteria and all the plants and
Yeah.
all the like especially like when you look at like agriculture and food and
Yeah.
beverage, like there's always new like tankards of beer that are being made. There's
Right.
always like a new disease. It's like formed now and it's like killing a bunch of crops. Like I think people don't realize like, I mean, DNA is all like, it's almost like atoms. Like it's literally like in everything, like
Yeah.
every single living thing has it. And in most living things, there's like a very clear use case that's like beneficial to humanity, is like why you want to sequence it. So that's kind of the most common misconception I run into.
Yeah, it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around that too, and I realized like the couch you're sitting on, you could sequence that couch because there's definitely bacteria on that couch. You could try and better understand by sequencing it. As you know, I've been thinking with some friends about the whole biosecurity angle of it. I think biosecurity it is sort of in vogue, at least in the venture markets right now. There was a big company that announced a big funding round recently, but something like what you're building seems pretty critical to the whole biosecurity angle,
Yeah.
where you can do decentralized sequencing quickly on-prem, get results fast, have long reads. How are you thinking about that aspect of your application?
We've had a number of conversations with folks from primarily BARDA and increasingly DARPA
Well, what is
about
BARDA? What is
specifically,
BARDA and DARPA?
yeah.
Yeah, what is BARDA and DARPA for those who don't know?
Oh God, what do the acronyms stand for? Like the Biomedical Advancement Research Department, something is
Okay.
BARDA, and then DARPA is like the kind of the parent organization, all under the might all be under the DoD, or they might be separate. I'm not exactly
It's
sure
like
how the hierarchy
the
works.
venture arm of the DoD, basically.
It's more of the grant arm of the DoD because there is DARPA Ventures as well.
Okay.
BARDA is usually non-dilutive funding,
Okay.
and that's who we've been talking to a little bit more lately. And then there's also ARPA H, which is in that category. So there's a lot of folks in the military who have biosecurity concerns
Yeah.
and are specifically investing money in technologies to do more portable, rapid, like point of sight testing, which is exactly what we do at Acorn. And one of the big things that we realized with particularly COVID was that like we just weren't fast enough to like detect where things were happening. So we were doing like a lot of COVID testing was actually very centralized. It started getting better towards the end as we developed more PCR techniques. Basically, we were having, I don't know if you were new folks at the university at that time, but literally we had universities where everyone was going to one center to go and get tested like
Oh, yeah, I remember.
every other week. And that was like a very inefficient way of actually doing testing. And that's because the devices were all in like decentralized labs. People were constantly running tests. They were building these like massive PCR machines till they can centralize things even more. And they realized, okay, that was too slow. We weren't actually able to track it. People were getting the results. They were getting the results pretty quickly, usually within 48 hours, which is not a bad turnaround. But even at 48 hours, like they're like, oh, just assume you have COVID until you're proven not. And you could have picked up COVID in that 48 hours. And by the time you're tested again in 2 weeks, like it was just too slow.
It was such a clusterfuck. I remember. Yeah.
And that was kind of the big moment. They're like, okay, we need to have a better way to like track these germs and track like contagions before they actually go fully out of control, because we just weren't fast enough with the centralized testing. It's literally like if everyone had to go to like the Telegram office to send a message, we didn't talk very much back then. So I do think that was kind of like a big moment, and that's kind of like inspired like the development of like new technologies to prevent that from ever happening. So that's where I think Acorn really plays into the whole biosecurity angle. is that we are that portable, rapid, decentralized, like point of sight testing. Right now, if you're doing a saliva sample, you actually don't need to do any form of culturing. You can just put it straight into the Acorn lab. So you can get your results within an hour. And we're still trying to actually cut that down. I think we can get it down to 15 minutes. Right now, an hour is still way faster than anything else you could possibly do. So that's kind of to me like where we fit in. Like that's how we solve the whole like pandemic preparedness challenge is like you just can test anytime, anywhere by anyone within an hour, you've got your results. Like you're never gonna have something go out of control because like if you know like hour after hour, if you have something like you're gonna be fine.
Yeah. This is a bit of a big picture question, but this is one quote that I heard someone use in the context of biosecurity, which was, you don't have brakes on cars so you can go slow. You have brakes on cars so you can go really fast. And the analogy he used in the context of biosecurity was that we have biosecurity measures in place because we want to go fast with biology. And I don't think that is obvious to most people, most normal people who kind of take drug development or anything else for granted. What does it mean to go fast in biology, in your view? There's like this whole world of synthetic biology that is super illegible for most people. People don't understand it. We take insulin for granted. What in your view, what does it mean to go fast?
This is almost gonna be a little bit controversial. I am actually a proponent of I don't know if you need brakes to necessarily go fast as much as you need brakes to be able to stop before you like hit the wall. I do think that the proliferation of affordable, rapid, ubiquitous sequencing will also have some negative consequences as well with the people who are going fast. So I do see that this is going to have a number of impacts. Something I'm seeing right now is that the increased level of sequencing is leading to more and more embryo selection, which like that's within reason, and then you're getting more and more designer babies, which becomes more morally questionable, and then you get full eugenics when you know see some. I've talked to a few people in the space who are like, oh, this would be such a great device for like this use case, and they tell me the use case. It's like absolutely abhorrent. It's like they're trying to like genetically engineer babies to like have certain features in a way that's not going to be actually genuinely good for the child. So there is like that aspect of it that I think like this is Pandora's box. Like, you know, you build the instrument, a lot of good's going to come out of it. We're going to like save a lot of people from preventable diseases. I think like continual like blood testing, for example, with sequencing, you'll be able to do like the fastest cancer detection ever. So like if you have like continual monitoring, if you have one of these Acorn labs at home, the chance of you developing like a serious cancer goes way down.
Yeah.
But similarly, in the whole like biology, like going fast, you're also going to get that other movement of people who become very experimental with DNA.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's kind of like what we're going to see happen. And there's definitely some moral and ethical questions of like, you know, okay, do you develop nuclear capabilities knowing that it's going to turn into both weapons and energy? Like, and the thing is, you kind of just have to, like, you always make the decision to go towards progress.
Yeah.
It's better the progress happens in a country that's relatively more ethically sound. Debatable, but in my opinion, I find it more ethically sound than others.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like my thought process there. What it means for biology to go fast. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be anywhere from like designer babies and full eugenics and people using it for very terrible things, all the way to like we don't have cancer anymore because we can epigenetically monitor that and prevent it from ever occurring. Yeah. And you're not going to be able to get to the good without also the bad.
That's a great answer. I'm reminded of this one insane conversation I had with someone in rural Missouri. I did this bike ride a few years ago to raise money for cancer research, and it was like 4,000 miles over 70 days. And the purpose of it was to kind of meet all these communities in rural America that you might not have met otherwise and connect with folks affected by cancer. And one of the people I met, who I can't stop ever thinking about, he told me about how his wife had just passed away like 10 days before we showed up to his town in rural Missouri. And he was going around and telling each one of us that, hey, get your colon tested for cancer every 5 years, not every 10 years. Her doctor told her to get tested every 10 years. And if she had just gotten tested more frequently, she would have been alive. That I think is what it also means to go fast in biology, where like you can prevent so many needless deaths from happening. You can elongate your lifespan and your health span in a meaningful way if you have continuous monitoring. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other aspect of it, of designer babies, is crazy, but I know folks, and especially in China, I feel like this is happening at an accelerated pace. I don't know if you have thoughts on the biotech race between China and the US currently as it stands. It feels like we're losing. It feels like all the momentum is with these Chinese companies that are kind of cranking out drugs, jumping from preclinical to clinical trials at the speed of light. And I don't know if you have any thoughts there, or maybe I've mischaracterized it.
I believe we're gonna completely crush China in the global race. I barely see them honestly as a true contender, and I might be in the minority here, but fundamentally they have a cultural problem that I think prevents them from truly competing on the global scale, which is they do not reward creativity in their culture at all. They reward like maximum efficiency output, which fundamentally means they're always going to be second to developing something. They're never going to be like the first ones to come up with something. They can't. And they have a whole culture built off of like, pretty much like stealing ideas from the US. I had a colleague at Northwestern, and it drove me crazy because she was actually from China. She was in the entrepreneurial center, and her whole reason why she was there was she was developing American businesses for China. So she was there, and she was actually received money from Northwestern, and it drove me crazy because she was making White Claw for China, for like Chinese markets, and she made a bunch of money off of that actually, because China refused to purchase White Claws from the US because it was an American company. So they made like the Chinese equivalent there. And they like, but that's the thing, they're never going to actually ever lead anything because that's how they operate. So unless they have a radical cultural shift, I really don't see how they can truly compete with America.
I completely disagree there. I think we've been saying this about China for the past 25, 30 years. Oh, they can't build anything net new. They're just going to copy and they're always going to be one step behind. But I think what we're actually seeing is that it's just as hard to build something new as it is to scale it infinitely, and put in the right processes and policies in place to where you're building the cheapest possible device at the best possible price point and maintaining the quality bar. I think, you're seeing that with EVs, for example. I don't think you can look at EVs today and say, oh, China is just copying what we're doing. No, they started behind, but they ostensibly copied American tech and kind of leapfrogged us. And I think
I still feel like Tesla is the number one like EV car out there in terms of performance, in terms of innovation, in terms of like features.
You
might disagree. I truly don't.
So we don't see Chinese. There's a reason why we don't have Chinese EVs in America on it. It's because if we get Chinese EVs in America, it's game over. Like, there's obviously all these national security concerns, but the American consumer is going to wake up and look at it and go, holy shit, they have it so much nicer in China, which I think they do. I've seen some of those videos. Maybe I've been like propagandized by the TikTok algorithm or the Reels algorithm, but like, they have some really great and cheap EVs in China that we simply do not have access to because it will be a national security concern to have Chinese EVs in America.
I personally also, I'm just looking at like the emissions output they have in China. Like whatever they're doing to create these vehicles is much more ineffective from a pure emissions perspective. Like I don't know. I'm very like, maybe this is, my family came from a communist country. I'm very familiar with the propaganda that comes out of communist countries. Yeah. I think China has like fundamental systemic issues that will make it like they will not be able to, like in the 80s, everyone thought like Japan was going to completely overtake the US because they had that massive like growth and then they stagnated. I think China right now maybe has like, I think they're kind of in their last hurrah, frankly. I think they've got massive systemic population problems.
Yeah.
I think the one child policy totally killed them. I saw a study recently that said that about 200 million people are missing in China, so overcounted in the population. So they have actually way fewer young people than they're saying they do. Yeah. They have a massive discrepancy between men and women in terms of like how many men to women they have, which is why they're involved in the North Korean sex trade that's been happening. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but a lot of girls are being sold from North Korea into China to kind of try to balance out the gender gap. They have a very anti-immigration policy. So they are not having children. They're not having immigrants. All of their intellectuals, like all their intellect has to be sourced from within the country. And there's massive brain drain of Chinese moving to America, which we've we've been taking some of their best and brightest like scientists and folks as well. I don't know. To me, just looking at like systemic factors, the fact that the US is very pro-immigration. And yes, we have like our moments where we crack down on whatever and like we go back and forth.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
overall, the US is one of the most pro-immigration countries in the world, especially compared to someone like China or even Japan. And the fact that we do have this like ownership culture, this entrepreneurial culture. There's just no venture capital in China. Like there's
Yeah,
not
they killed
that.
it. They killed
Yeah.
it. No, I want to agree with all of everything you said. I just think the concern is more real than we might like. There was one thing you said around what was it? The talent. I think one big point of pride in China was that the what's the name of the DeepSeek?
DeepSeek.
Yeah, the DeepSeek white paper had Chinese authors, none of whom went to American universities, and that was like a big point of national pride in China. That trend holds. I don't know. We'll see. I'm a big America bull. Like I love this country. So happy to be here. But I just think that there's so many things that China's well, specifically with biotech. Like my understanding is that they're kind of jumping ahead in terms of how many skilled lab technicians they have and how much output they can produce just
Yeah,
by
no, in terms
virtue
of
of
like if efficiency, I think
yeah,
China can like out efficiency us. How
yeah,
do they can out innovate us? So I will say like I can I can concede the point that like I know China right now is also developing sequencers. Again, they're modeled after Illumina. They're
yes,
very
yes,
similar.
yes,
Like, and they can make them like probably more cheaply and mass produce them more easily than we can in the US, for sure,
yeah,
guaranteed. That doesn't like, but there's no like nanopore technologies developed there. All
yeah,
of it's developed, like all the third generation sequencing has developed actually in the UK and the US. And now all the new technologies I'm seeing developed are again happening a little bit. Actually, Germany has some interesting stuff that's being produced, and then the UK and then the US. That's where all the, and Canada, actually, Canada has a lot in the nanopore space. All of the innovation is coming out of there. I don't know, maybe China's like trying to keep it super like locked and key and quiet, but they just don't have that same level of innovation. And I think that there's a psychological thing. Like, I don't think I would have worked so hard on Acorn if it wasn't like mine in a
yeah,
very real sense.
yeah,
And I think that's like a fundamental problem when you don't have a culture in which you can own a business. So like,
yeah.
yeah.
I agree for the most part, but I also think maybe Chinese folks are motivated by other things, which is I don't know. It's a more collectivist society. Like I want to do it for the love of country, the love of serving my people. I think that's really really.
I
I think
don't
that
think
that
people, maybe there's like a few, but it's
I
like as a population level, I think
yeah, no, I agree.
yeah.
I'm just trying to steel man like what that might be for them. I forgot what I was gonna ask next, but how does your outlook on building this company and this technology change now that you're expecting a child?
Very minimally,
I
honestly. It's
was
kind
expecting
of
a profound answer, but I guess that's a good enough.
no. It's I would for a while I thought I was going to build Acorn and then I was going to have children. I had a moment where I recognized that you kind of have to build your life in tandem
Yeah.
and you can't just like, be a startup founder and then just keep being a founder and then finish being a founder and then like I don't know, I had a
Yeah.
very weird perception that, you go, you like drop out of school, you start the company, you sell the company or you IPO and
Yeah.
then you go into the family and life thing. I realized that that's totally nonsensical and these things can run in parallel. And that's kind of
Yeah.
how I view like the work and the life is like they happen at the same time. You don't work and then you have life.
Yeah.
And that's something that was like a big shift. So as a result, a lot of the life impacts, I don't know if they really changed my work so much, which
Yeah.
has been great. I've actually been enjoying the fact that I can like continue to work full time. Obviously, there's been like limitations. I can't travel in the last month of pregnancy, and I'm sure like the first 3 months postpartum are going to be very much limited in terms of my mobility and like ability to like go to various conferences. But I have like an excellent team, and I've got co-founders, and I have people who are like able to attend and do these things. So there's not that much of a concern there. I will say the whole process of going through like the medical community, and now that I'm being re-exposed to like having to constantly go to the doctor's offices to run all these tests. Oh my God, I can't wait to just have an acorn lab and run them at home. The fact, like, they had to draw blood, I think, like twice to run like state mandated STD panels. And like, I'm like, no, I didn't pick anything up. Like, I know where I've been the last 8 months. I didn't pick anything up from when you first tested me when I walked in to when I, was retesting the third trimester. I'm like, I can't believe I had to like get up while I was feeling super nauseous and go all the way over here, sit in this room for 1 hour, wait 10 minutes for someone to come and draw my blood, and then go home only to be told the thing I already knew, which is I had a negative result. Nothing was present. So it's definitely like reawakened my frustration with how testing is being done. But fundamentally, like, the plan has not changed. We're charging ahead. And my certainty that this is going to be of value to people has only grown.
Yeah, I'm with you. How did you make that change from thinking of that work in life for these things that happen sequentially versus parallelly? What was the moment of realization?
Well, my husband proposed and I kind of had to make a call there. So I kind of realized I can't be like, hey, wait till I sold the company.
Yeah.
I was like, no, like, I'm gonna do it. I'll do it in tandem. I love it was like peer group. I saw other founders getting married and having kids, and I was like, well, this is not impossible. We're definitely in a more entrepreneurial. Gen Z is just known to be like a much, much more entrepreneurial generation. So something I've definitely noticed, it's like we're way more entrepreneurial. So there's way more founders out there. And I think these are kind of unique problems. Like, where before, like, I think the traditional 9 to 5 was more common. Like, you would go to school, you work for a larger company. So I do think these are kind of like unique, like being a founder, being an entrepreneur is a unique career. And it's hard to visualize having a traditional family with a very unique and different career. And you think the lifestyles are incompatible, but when you see other people going through it and doing it, you realize they're not.
Yeah, I think that's a really great positive sign. One thing I've thought about is just how much of a factory line a lot of startups and founders have kind of put themselves on, where you kind of have like the traditional markers of success, like, oh, I got into YC, or I even got the Teal Fellowship, which is just hard to get. I mean, it's very impressive for people who get it. Like, I have a lot of respect, but at the end of the day, it also just becomes a marker that you strive for as a source of validation. And then you go through this pipeline of YC and then tinkering around, pivot, figure out what you want to build, talk to the same set of investors, go to their poker nights, play the Silicon Valley games. It just seems very contrived and inauthentic in a lot of different ways. I guess I don't really have a question here. Just what do you think about this? You've seen a lot of your friends go through this. How do you avoid some of these pitfalls?
Say I was kind of blessed to have not started in SF, and therefore the entrepreneurial thing was very different for me.
Yes.
So coming out of Chicago, and now we're in Boston, which is more of a startup-y city.
Yeah.
But Chicago just does not have a startup culture. So I felt like I was atypical and doing something bizarre from the beginning. I was actually banned from the university's pitch competition because they didn't want people to see that a good startup came from a dropout, because they were trying so hard not to incentivize dropouts, which is so like I got the Teal Fellowship. No one knew what that was. Absolutely no one. People didn't know who Peter Thiel was.
Oh my
which is
God.
like just so different from the like SF community. Like, I go there and I see I'm a Teal Fellow, and they name off like 4 or 5 other Teal Fellows, and they're like, oh, we're super familiar with the Teal Fellowship. We love Teal Fellows. I'm like, what? Like, I got this thing in the Midwest, and then everyone was like, I had to describe Peter Thiel as Elon Musk's co-founder from PayPal. And that was like, people knew who Elon Musk was most of the time, but sometimes not always.
Yeah.
And then he did the whole Doge thing. Now everyone knows who he is. For like, the guy just came from such a different environment. It was just so different. People all looked at me like I was absolutely crazy for dropping out. It looked like what I was doing was not considered like by any means, like, I think you use the word contrived. Like, it was so bizarre in that environment when everyone went to school for 4 years and then became a consultant.
Yeah.
Not even joking. Like, I was in the engineering school and everyone was like trying to get a consulting job.
Oh my God, yeah.
And I was like, why are you an engineer if you don't want to build anything? Like, if you're just going to go and consult.
Yeah.
So that was also, I knew I didn't want to do that. That's why I went down this very different path. But can see how in SF it's very rote, especially if you're doing like one of those like buzzword companies, Web3, something,
No,
cloud
no, 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 no,
computing.
no, don't, that's a dirty word now, Anna. You can't
Yeah,
say
now we don't
that.
like that. Sorry, we turned
AI agent,
crypto was before.
AI
Um,
agent.
I know AI is the new one. Blockchain out, who cares? Crypto, who cares? Gone. NFTs, like
Don't you just
blasphemy.
you
I
can't say
know.
that. It's illegal.
Oh, I have 1% battery. Let me just quickly.
This is a good reminder for me of how much of a bubble that I live in, that I only meet people who are playing the same games as everyone else, and it gets annoying after a while. But you forget that people in where I'm in Texas and the Midwest, it's a very the status hierarchies are very different. And the thing you said about Northwestern not putting you in the front of these pitch competitions sounds so short-sighted to me, and it kind of reminds you that Stanford is maybe a special place where they
Yeah.
encourage this kind of behavior, because like every other school in the US is guided entirely by their 4-year graduation rates, and if they
Mhm.
don't hit that, they're kind of failing. So not putting you in this pitch competition just seems so incredibly short-sighted.
Yeah, the woman who is the main sponsor of the Entrepreneurial Center at Northwestern, I'm going to keep this vague because I'm technically not supposed to say this. She she like is the main sponsor of
Yeah.
the Entrepreneurial Center, and she said the worst thing that someone could do in college is drop out to start a company. And she runs the Entrepreneurial Center. She's like, the worst thing these people could do for their careers and their lives is actually become an entrepreneur, because they're going to fail and they're going to ruin their lives. They should just learn an entrepreneurial mindset to use towards a consulting job.
God, that hurts. Oh my
So
God.
that's like embedded into like, I think, the Midwest ethos. Why hasn't Chicago taken off as a main entrepreneurial center? I wonder. It's actually gotten a lot better. Like there are real people who are pushing towards it. There's P33. There's a lot of really good institutions. But like when you look at the traditional like academic colleges in the area, Chicago, Northwestern, honestly, even UIUC, like all the ones in the Midwest area, they just don't have that entrepreneurial culture. And I think the Silicon Valley bubble is a real phenomena, but it's also very special, very unique thing. And I'm so happy we have it.
You're right. You're right. I'm being unnecessarily harsh, honestly. It's very easy to forget the special culture that we have in Silicon Valley. Yeah, the siren call of BCG, Bain, McKinsey is so real for like kids getting
Mm-hmm.
out of college. I almost joined BCG at one point, and I kind of shudder to think about the life I would have had as a consultant there. I'm very glad I didn't go down that path. Before we wrap it up entirely, I wanted to ask you any pieces of content, like articles, podcasts, books that you've consumed that you think would benefit everyone. If you have any suggestions.
Yeah. Um, 12 Rules for Life, Jordan Peterson.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay, make your bed. Make your bed, number one.
Make your bed, which I don't think I made it today. But I do think, weirdly, the stuff he said about the lobster and the hierarchies, I found very pertinent and very
What did
helpful for
what did he
me.
say? I am not familiar with that part.
Long story short, the concept of a hierarchy is older than trees. So trees are a more recent development genetically than the DNA for hierarchy. And we fundamentally exist to respond to whether we're perceiving ourselves to be higher or lower. And that changes your brain chemistry fundamentally. So when you go and join a very large like corporation and you're at the bottom of the corporation, your brain actually changes its molecular structure, like its chemical composition,
Hmm.
in response to that, to make a more submissive brain. And this is found, the primary example is like he shows how lobsters are in a fight, like when they go and they compete. And he also talks about rats and that, and how rats can keep fighting as long as they win at least 30% of the time. Once they stop winning at that level, they start to like check out and stop fighting, and they have their brain redevelop.
Hmm.
That to me was very important in how I structured Acorn, actually, where I was like, okay, because I know that hierarchy is going to have such an impact on performance, you keep the structure very flat. You don't make it so there's multiple managers. The worst thing you can have is like multiple people who are telling you what to do. And the more collaborative and flat you keep it structured, the better it is for everyone's like mental health and performance. And additionally, sometimes when we're engineering something, we go through a series of things not working in order to keep someone like fighting. and not completely demoralized, at some point, if you notice there's been too many subsequent failures, you have to do something that's like hopeful for people pulling them out. So there was a period of like 3 to 4 months where we were just having never ending problems with our chip. Like it would just like the fabrication wasn't working, like everything was going wrong. And so I took a week and I developed, I kid you not, like a puzzle, like a puzzle meets scavenger hunt meets escape room, like week-long activity for the team. And they all went through that together as a team. We kind of didn't work very much that week. We just took it, kind of bonded. They had like, these like escape rooms they had to get like clues from, and then that would lead them to a new location. And I spent like 2 weeks planning it over my Christmas break. We did this January actually. And then they like hit the hurrah, they got the final prize, they unlocked it, and they all felt so great. The engineering problem we were having was resolved within 2 weeks of that.
That's crazy.
And I think it really was like when they're stuck, like I don't know, just some of the stuff he has there on like how your brain actually works in response to like success and failure and hierarchy and stimulus, like that very much coded the way like I lead and the way I run things, and how I monitor failure and success and make sure that everyone maintains that kind of positive lobster energy.
Wow, that I did not know this. That is so interesting. Jordan Peterson was really popular like 4 years ago. I remember I got into his stuff 4 or 5 years ago, and
Yeah.
he's kind of a bad word now, but I think his ideas are very much worth examining, and like you have implementing them in a very practical way. What other surprises have you had in trying to build a startup with Acorn? And you have like 10 employees right now, and how do you work with PhDs and all these people that are much older or much more accomplished, quote unquote? Like,
Yeah.
how do you?
This was a bigger problem, definitely earlier on. It's not an issue these days. Honestly, having like a husband and a child makes people perceive that I'm older than I actually am. People don't actually read that I'm 25. They think I'm usually like 32 or so. So I don't actually have problems anymore with like being taken seriously. This was a massive problem for me when I was like 19, 20, and I was starting Acorn. I was
Yeah.
trying to get like PhDs and postdocs to like listen to me and do what I was saying.
Yeah.
I remember I used to like take photos in specific ways to make my hair look like it was graying. Like I would like do certain things to like age myself up. I remember thinking like, oh, I can't wait to get wrinkles so that people will actually take me
Oh
seriously.
my
I'm over it now. I'm like, okay, I've done the like people take me seriously. I don't need the wrinkles. So none of those yet, thankfully, but we'll see. In terms of like challenges these days, very minimal. I think like once you hit a certain point of like success, like you have a product and you have customers, like that's the global validation. People need to believe that you're a real business.
Yeah.
It's much harder before that, especially if you're in your early 20s. You can try cosmetics like I did. That actually wasn't the most effective thing. The most effective thing was just like if someone just didn't respond to me, so I was like young or whatever, you just move on. You just move on because there will be people who will invest in you and who will like believe you even though you're young, and you just have to find them and start with them.
Yeah.
And just don't take it personally. I think a lot of it's projection. I think a lot of people were like, well, when I was 19, I was dumb and I didn't know anything and I was doing all these silly things.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, but I'm not. So you just like don't take it personally. You accept that like they're just projecting their 19-year-old self onto you.
Yeah.
And you decouple from that and you keep moving on. And you just accept the failure. Another Jordan Peterson thing is that if you're cold calling, you will on average have a 2% success rate. So 1 in 50. And I kind of kept that in my mind. And I call it the 2% rule. So whenever I'm really up against the wall and I just have to figure something else out, I literally just start like punching as many different like opportunities and just start like, churning things out. Cause I'm like, hey, 2% rule. Like I gotta try 50 people to get one to believe me. And that's how I raised my first round. That's how I did my first few things. I kind of call it like punching the brick wall, which is, you just kind of, if there's no way to like go over or go around, there's no way to smart your way through it. You're just gonna have to punch your way through. You just keep going until you break through.
You're absolutely correct. And I think it's very easy to forget that. I hadn't quantified it. I just knew that you're gonna get more no's than yeses. You just gotta keep going. But the 2% rule makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Do you have a few more minutes to talk about personality types? You're a big fan of like the Myers-Briggs test. I retook mine yesterday and I got a confirmation that I am the campaigner type.
ENFP.
Yes.
I think that's what I said too when I was like talking to you. I'm like, oh, I think you're, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Very perceptive. How did you get into it, and why is it, how has it been helpful to you?
I got into it during the pandemic. I was just like, bored. Maybe I was people starved or something. So I started just
Yeah.
like more into it. And it's kind of started just from like fun. Like I started with just like taking online quizzes with friends, like everyone does. And then I found this like channel on YouTube with my best friend at the time, Kate, who was like also very into this. And we both just like went down the rabbit hole. And we found out that each of the letters in specific formats was tied with like cognitive functions. And there was this Jungian psychology behind it.
Yeah.
And you could pretty much determine how people thought based off of their personality types, assuming they were typed correctly. And there was various like levels to this. So there was the just basic personality type with the functions, and then there were deviations from that. So you could be a like double extrovert or a double introvert type. And that would change exactly how you functioned. The order of the different four cognitive functions like had different like ways it manifested. And we kept, the more we dove in, the more we found like how accurate they were. If you want to dive in, it's probably 3 hours to get the overall like full perspective, but I'll leave you just like a very short in the nutshell. I found it as a very helpful tool just to start kind of pattern matching people a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't try to go too crazy with the personality type thing because I do think that you can like overly box someone in. But because when the theory was at its fullest length and fleshed out at the absolute most, you had like all these different ways you could switch around the functions. You basically had, I believe it was like 512 different personality types within the Myers-Briggs like category that you could then use to like understand someone. So it was variable enough that you could kind of customize it to the individual.
Yeah.
What I found helpful was I knew that people who had specific cognitive like pathways were going to be better at doing certain kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
And that became very helpful from like a hiring perspective, is I could very quickly assess from like just like a casual conversation kind of where someone was with like the 512 level fidelity, but at least within the 16 level fidelity. And then I could narrow down from there. And that would quickly help me assess if they had the right build for the job that I was hiring.
Yeah.
So there's like 4 main categories that like all the 16 fall into.
Yeah.
Which is chaos types, order types, people manager types, and then individual contributor types. I actually found like Max, for example, is a chaos type, which is someone who's hyper creative, hyper productive. Yeah. You would also be in that category. So someone who's like, but you're like, you can like start pulling different things out. So like Max was like a visual, his type was visual because he was an S. So he was visual chaos. So I was like, okay, he's going to be really, really good at this marketing stuff.
Yeah,
that's just naturally right? Like within his functions.
He's your CMO.
Yep.
Right. COO. My bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
What type are you?
People manager, ENTJ, commander, people manager.
Right. Commander.
Yes. So I'm very much like analytical, very people oriented, but people oriented in a logical way. Usually the big difference, most entrepreneurs are either ENTJs or ENFJs, and it depends on their company and what their goal is. People who are the T types are much more likely to be, how do I put it? They're much more likely to be like, I'm going to solve this like logical need that a lot of people have. People who are like ENFJ types are going to be much more like, I want to make a lot of people happy. And this company is going to make people happy. Like that, they're just much more focused on like feelings and happiness. Also ESTP types, which is like Max's archetype, which is like chaos visual, also tend to be very entrepreneurial, but in a different way. So they tend to be much more in the entertainer category. They tend to be much more like the fun, wacky startups you see are much more likely to be run by an ESTP. It's like Max's previous startup was a bar crawl app. Nice. And he was like, like he was in that space. And he actually works very well at Acorn now because he has that visual inclination, and we're working with breweries again. So he's in his element. And you can kind of build the proper founding team. Ryan, for example, is a kind of classic, like I would say double introvert, INTJ, which is the architect type, is one of the reasons why I think he's a very, very effective engineer. He's also the introverted version of my type, which means he's like, an organizer. He's like an order person, but he does have a little bit of that people manager. And when you work with the introverted version of your type or the extroverted version of your type, you understand them very well intuitively. So like most of my best friends have been like INTJs, and then I like organize. So I found it just helpful from that perspective. I hope that's like gives you like a little window into it without getting you the 512 different permutations of what they all mean.
There's a lot we can go into, but this is a good overview. And the fact that it's been practical and applicable to the way you've
Yeah.
hired is actually quite relevant to a lot of folks who might listen to this. I should take it more seriously. I think I've attracted a very similar kind of friend group over the course of my years. And I think if I were to run this test, I would get a predictable result, I think.
I would recommend if you want to look more into it, there is a channel and I forgot what they were called, but they really dive into it. But I'd literally just look up like ENFP cognitive functions and then start from there.
Got it. I'm gonna do that. This was awesome. I really enjoyed it. You've been very generous with your time. You have a lot on your plate, so I so appreciate it. Do you have any thoughts, questions, ideas for me before we wrap up?
No, I think it's all good. That was a very wide breadth of topics and conversations.
Yeah.
I hope this will be interesting to some folks out there.
Interesting to me, and I think that's what matters. Okay. This was actually really worthwhile. I think others will also find it super worthwhile. Thank you.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much. All right. I'll let you go
Awesome.
now.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.